I ended up on her porch because I was tired of pretending I was still getting somewhere. That Sunday had already gone bad before noon. I'd had coffee with a woman from the next county over, somebody my cousin's wife swore I'd like. Nice enough. Pretty, put together, asked all the right things. Where I worked, whether I liked to travel, why I'd never married. I gave the same cleaned-up answers I'd been giving for years, and halfway through hearing myself talk, I felt like I was listening to a man applying for a job he didn't want. By the time I got home, my house felt too quiet, too neat, too much like proof that nobody else had touched a thing in it in a long time. I worked all week with my hands. Roofing, siding, repairs, whatever came steady. I got up early, paid my bills on time, kept gas in the truck, kept tools where they belonged. From the outside, there wasn't much wrong with me. In a town like ours, that counted for something. People knew my truck. They knew where I lived. They knew I was reliable. Around here, that can pass for a whole life if you let it. But some evenings, especially on Sundays, it hit me that I was 36 and still standing in a life that had stopped moving years ago. A lot of that had started with Emma. I met her when she was just out of school and already acting like the town lines were temporary. She was smart, quick, always talking about what came next. College first, then something bigger after that. Marketing, media, branding, one of those fields where people used words like launch and platform and meant them like religion. I loved how alive she was. Back then I thought that kind of restlessness meant a person had fire. I thought if I stayed steady enough, she'd have something solid to come back to. What I missed was that she wasn't looking for solid. She was looking for farther. She didn't leave me in one fight. That would have almost been easier. She left in stages. First her attention. Then her patience. Then her body. By the time she finally packed up and headed for Austin, I'd already been standing there alone for months, just too stubborn to admit it. Nobody in town had to explain any of that to me. They all saw it happen. The only person who never looked at me like I'd been a fool was her mother, Dana. Dana had stayed. Same house out past the feed store, same porch, same wind chime that knocked around whenever a truck passed too fast. Over the years I'd helped her with things here and there. Loose step. Bad alternator connection. Fence post after a storm. Nothing unusual for a small town. You help people, especially the ones who've always been decent to you. She'd make tea, or hand me a plate with something on it, and we'd talk like people who didn't need to impress each other. She never tried to rewrite what happened with Emma. Never told me I was better off in some fake cheerful voice. She just spoke plain. That was rare enough to matter. So that Sunday, instead of sitting in my own kitchen feeling sorry for myself, I drove out to her place. She opened the door before I knocked twice. "You look like that date went great," she said. I laughed once. "That obvious? On your face?" "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come in." Her kitchen smelled like apples and cinnamon. There was a pie cooling by the window and a dish towel over her shoulder. She was wearing jeans and an old gray shirt, no makeup I could see, hair clipped up like she'd been busy and didn't care who noticed. Somehow that made my chest tighten more, not less. I sat down at the table and said, "Can I ask you something without you feeding me some polite line?" She turned, leaned back against the counter, and crossed her arms. "You came to the right house for that." I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the mug she set in front of me. How's a man supposed to start over when he feels about 10 years older than he is? She didn't answer fast. That was another thing about Dana. She never rushed toward easy words. Finally she said, "You're asking the wrong question." I looked up at her. She said, "Starting over isn't the hard part. Most people can do that. They just pick somebody new and drag all the same mess into it. The hard part is telling the truth first." About what? About whether you're lonely, she said, or whether you're actually ready. That landed harder than I wanted it to. I looked down at my coffee and gave a little shrug like maybe it didn't matter, but she knew me too well for that. You still talk like a man trying not to bother anybody with his life, she said. That's not healed. That's just quiet. I let out a breath and leaned back in the chair. Outside, I could hear the chime tapping in the wind. Somewhere down the road a dog barked once and shut up. I don't even know what ready looks like anymore, I said. Her face softened, but not in a pitying way. Then maybe quit chasing the look of it. That should have been the end of it. Just advice. Just another kitchen talk with a woman who'd seen too much and still chose honesty. But when she set her hand over mine for half a second, just steady and warm, something old in me shifted. Not reopened exactly. More like turned its head toward a different door. After that, I told myself I was reading too much into it. That was the smart thing to tell myself, so I kept saying it. Dana had put her hand over mine because she was kind, because she knew I'd been dragging around the same dead weight for years, because some people still knew how to be decent without making a whole speech out of it. That was all. I left her house with half a pie wrapped in foil on the passenger seat and her voice still in my head telling me to quit chasing the look of being ready. Then I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly what she told me not to do. I went out with a woman named Cheryl who sold insurance in town and laughed too hard at everything I said, even when I wasn't joking. Then there was one dinner with a teacher from 20 minutes away who spent most of the evening talking about how she was definitely not staying in this area forever, which was enough to make my shoulders tighten before the check even came. I wasn't angry at any of them. That was the problem. I wasn't much of anything. I'd sit there across from somebody nice, somebody trying, and all I could think about was how easy it would be to be at Dana's kitchen table instead, listening to her tell me why my truck sounded rough when I started it cold. That was when it started bothering me for real. Because Dana wasn't exciting in the way Emma used to be. Emma always had motion around her. New haircut, new plan, new city she wanted to see, new kind of life she thought was waiting just outside the county line. Being around her had felt like trying to hold on to something already moving away from me. I used to think that feeling meant I was lucky. Dana was the opposite. Nothing about her asked for attention, and somehow that made it easier to keep giving her mine. She said what she meant. She stayed where she said she'd be. If she laughed, it was because something was actually funny. If she asked how I was, she waited long enough to hear the answer. One Thursday after work I stopped by to fix the screen door on her back porch. It had started sagging and scraping the frame. She met me outside with a glass of iced tea and said, "You know, I'm starting to think you break things here just so you can feel needed." I took the glass from her. "That would require planning." She smiled. "And we both know you don't do that unless it's about tools." I got to work, and she stayed nearby longer than she had to, handing me screws, asking about my week, talking about the church fundraiser coming up on Saturday. Nothing heavy. Just talk. But it had that easy rhythm now, the kind you don't notice right away because it slips under your guard. At one point I had to brace a hand against the frame above her shoulder to check the hinge line, and when she turned, we ended up closer than either of us expected. Not touching. Just close enough that I caught the smell of flour and soap on her shirt, close enough to see the small line at the corner of her mouth from years of holding back things she could have said. She looked at me for a second too long. Then she stepped aside and said, "You hungry?" Like nothing had happened. Inside, she cut up tomatoes from her garden and made sandwiches like she'd been feeding me after odd jobs for half my life. I sat at the counter while she moved around the kitchen, and I had the stupidest thought a man can have: this feels like something. That should have scared me more than it did. After that, I noticed how often I turned toward her without deciding to. If I passed her at the hardware store, my whole mood lifted before we even said hello. If she texted asking whether I knew a good place to get a tire patched, I answered too fast. If I had a rough day, I found myself thinking about her porch before I thought about my own house. She noticed it too. Dana noticed everything. At the church fundraiser, we ended up side by side near the pie table while people moved around us with paper plates and folding chairs. I was helping carry boxes in from the fellowship hall, and she was keeping count of what still needed to go out. At some point she brushed a crumb off the front of my shirt without thinking, and a woman from town looked right at us, smiled to herself, and kept walking. Dana pulled her hand back like she'd touched a hot stove. That was the first moment it stopped feeling harmless. Later that night I walked her to her car because the lot was dark and half the overhead lights were dead again. She unlocked the door, then stood there with one hand on it, not getting in. "You ought to give one of those women a real chance," she said, looking somewhere around my shoulder instead of at me. "Which one?" "Any of them." I let out a breath. "That sounds like advice you don't believe." Her eyes came up to mine then, steady and tired all at once. "That's because I'm trying very hard to." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The air between us had changed too much for another safe answer. She gave a small nod like she regretted saying even that much, then opened the car door. And before she got in, she said quietly, "This is starting to look wrong, and the worst part is I'm not sure it feels wrong." Then she drove off and left me standing there with my heart beating so hard it made me feel young and old at the same time. I'm finally waking up. If you're enjoying my story, please like and subscribe. After the fundraiser, I tried keeping my distance for almost a week. Not because I wanted to. Because I knew exactly why I should. A town like ours doesn't need facts to make a story. It just needs timing, a look that lingers too long, somebody seeing the wrong two people laughing together near a pie table, and by the next morning folks are filling in the rest for themselves. I knew that. Dana knew it better than I did. She'd lived here longer, raised a daughter here, sat through years of women talking sweet to your face and sharp the second you walked off. So I stayed busy. Took extra work. Helped a guy re-roof a shed out near the county line. Cleaned out my truck. Changed the oil even though it didn't need it yet. I told myself space was the decent thing. Respectful. Necessary. By Thursday evening I was standing in my kitchen eating crackers over the sink like a man twice divorced, and her text came through. "You still alive, or did that church crowd scare you off?" I stared at it longer than I should have before answering. Still alive. Then a second bubble from her. "Porch lights on if you feel like stopping by." No smiley face. No extra line. Just that. I sat there with my phone in my hand and knew that if I went, something was going to stop pretending to be harmless. I went anyway. She was already outside when I pulled in, sitting in the porch chair with a light blanket over her legs even though the air wasn't that cold. There were 2 glasses of sweet tea on the little table between the chairs. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me the whole time and wasn't surprised I'd lost the argument with myself. "Thought you were avoiding me," she said. I was. "How'd that go?" "Poorly." That got a real smile out of her, but it didn't last. I sat down, and for a minute all we did was listen to the insects in the dark and the sound of somebody's truck way out on the highway. Then she said, "We can't keep acting like we don't know what this is." My chest went tight. "And what is it?" She turned in her chair and faced me fully. "That's exactly the question." I looked down at my glass. "Dana." "No." Her voice stayed calm, but it had steel in it. "You don't get to do that thing where you go quiet and hope I'll make it easier for you." I let out a breath and leaned back. "I'm trying not to make a mess. And I'm trying not to become one." That hit me hard enough. I looked at her fast. She held my eyes and said, "I will not be the woman you drift toward because my daughter left. She thinks I'm just lonely. Is dating an ex's mother crossing the line? Tell me below." There it was. The thing both of us had been walking around. I opened my mouth, closed it again. She gave a small nod like she'd expected that. That's what I thought. It's not that simple. Then make it plain. I got up and walked to the end of the porch, mostly because sitting still felt impossible. The yard was black except for the porch light cutting a weak yellow shape across the grass. I could feel her watching me, waiting me out. Finally I said, what I had with Emma. I stopped there, because even hearing her name out loud felt like opening some old drawer I'd kept shut. Back then I thought wanting somebody hard enough meant you were seeing them clearly. I loved her, yeah. I did. But part of what I loved was what she made me feel like maybe my life could become. Like if she chose me, then I was headed somewhere bigger too. Dana didn't interrupt. I turned and looked at her. It took me a long time to admit she was never really standing still with me. I was in love with a future that kept moving the target. The porch stayed quiet. Then I said the part I'd been trying not to know. That's not what this is with you. She looked away first, toward the yard. You don't know that for sure. I do. How? Because I don't feel like I'm chasing anything, I thought. Because with you I'm more myself than I've been in years. Because the best part of my week has become your kitchen, your porch, your voice asking me questions I can't dodge. What I said out loud was, because I'm not trying to become somebody around you. I already am somebody around you. Her face changed at that, just a little. Softer, but also sadder somehow. You make me feel seen, I said. Not fixed. Not managed. Not judged. Just seen. And once I noticed that, I couldn't stop noticing it. She stood then, blanket falling back over the chair, and took one step closer. I need more than lonely words from a man who misses being wanted. That's not what this is. Then tell me what it is. I looked right at her and let it land where it needed to. The only part of my life that feels honest lately is the part that has you in it. Her mouth parted, but she didn't speak. I stepped closer too, enough that the whole rest of the world seemed to pull back from the porch. And if that scares you, it scares me too. But don't tell me this is about Emma anymore. It isn't. Dana's eyes went wet before she blinked it away. You don't get to say that unless you mean it all the way. I do. She searched my face like she was looking for the younger fool I used to be, the one who confused wanting with knowing. Whatever she saw there made her breathing change. But she still shook her head once. Not no. Not yet. Just enough to say the truth was finally in the room, and now neither of us got to hide behind anything smaller. She didn't call me the next day, and I didn't go by her house. That was probably the first smart thing either of us had done in a while. I worked a full Friday with my head somewhere else, measuring wrong twice, dropping a socket off a ladder, standing in one spot longer than I needed to because my mind kept going back to her porch and the look on her face when I told her the truth. Not the easy version. The real one. By evening I was worn out in that useless way where your body's tired but your thoughts are still pacing. Around 6 I cleaned up, changed shirts, and drove out there anyway. I didn't take tools. That mattered to me. I didn't want any excuse in my hands. Her truck was there. Porch light on. I walked up, knocked once, and when she opened the door, she looked like she already knew why I'd come. Can I come in? I asked. She stepped aside. You don't need my permission for that and you know it. Tonight I do. That made her pause, but she let me in. The house was quiet, no TV on, just the hum of the fridge and the late sun going gold through the kitchen window. She stayed standing by the counter. I stayed near the table. It felt better that way at first. Honest. No place to hide. I've had all day to think, I said. She folded her arms. And? And I know what I need to say before you stop me. A little piece of tension moved in her face, but she didn't interrupt. I said, what I had with Emma was real for the man I was then. I'm not gonna lie about that just because it ended bad. I loved her. But I loved her like a younger man loves a life he thinks will prove something. I kept telling myself if I held on long enough, I'd end up in the future she wanted. That wasn't love seeing clearly. That was me reaching. Dana looked down at the floor once, then back at me. With you, there's nothing to reach for, I said. That's how I know it's different. I'm not trying to become more interesting, more impressive, more anything. I'm not trying to keep up. I'm not waiting to see if I get picked. I'm just myself when I'm here. She swallowed but said nothing. I don't come to you because you're safe, I said. I come to you because you're the only place I don't feel split in half. You're not what was left behind after her. You're who you've been all along, and I was too blind for too long to understand what I was looking at. That landed. I could see it land. Her voice came out quiet. You think that fixes the history? No, I said. Town's still gonna talk. She'll hear about it eventually. Maybe she'll hate it. Maybe some people already have opinions. None of that changes what's true. Dana looked away toward the sink. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, I said. It's just clear. That was the word that finally brought her eyes back to mine. Clear. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Not some rush I could mistake for fate because it made me nervous. Just clear. She let out a breath and leaned one hand on the counter like she needed the support of something solid. My whole problem, she said, is I know exactly what it costs to be the practical choice. I've lived enough life to know men can confuse peace with love. I'm not confusing them. How can you be so sure? Because I'd spent years in noise, I thought. Because peace had never once made my heart hit this hard. Because wanting her wasn't me settling down. It was me waking up. I took one step closer. Because this doesn't feel like less. It feels like the first honest thing I've done in a long time. Her eyes filled, and this time she didn't hide it. She just stood there and let me see. Then she laughed once through it, soft and shaky. You really picked the hardest road in the county, didn't you? Looks that way. And you still want it? I want you, I said. Not because you stayed. Not because she left. Not because I'm lonely. Because when I'm with you, my life feels like mine. For a second I thought she might still turn away. Not out of doubt exactly, but out of habit. Out of all the years she'd spent being the woman who handled things instead of asking for anything. Instead she walked over to me, slow enough that I felt every step of it, and set her hand against my chest like she was checking whether I was really there. I needed to hear it that way, she said. I know. Then she kissed me. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't careful either. It felt like something both of us had already known before either one of us was brave enough to say it out loud. When she leaned into me, the whole long mess of the past didn't disappear. It just stopped running the room. A truck went by out on the road. Somewhere a dog barked. The town kept being the town. But when she looked up at me, there was no confusion left in her face. Just choice. And for the first time in years, in that quiet kitchen with the evening light fading out the window, I knew I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was home.